One thing that always really baffles me is when the global media and the human rights organizations gang up together to accuse and demonize, attack Israel, accuse Israel of things that Israel never even really did, or something like facial recognition that the whole world uses, but singles out Israel to say they're committing a facial recognition apartheid against Palestinians. We're going to dig into that today. Stay tuned for a lot more right here at the Israel Guys. Welcome to the Israel Guys, where we believe in a world of Jew hatred and anti-Israel propaganda. You should have a direct connection to the land and people of Israel. Guys, we've got a really great topic today. It's facial recognition, and is there really a facial recognition apartheid happening in Israel? Well, we're going to dive into it. And where does this all stem from? My gracious, where is this even coming from? How could such an audacious slap against Israel actually even happen? Well, it stems to the global media problem and the so-called human rights organization problem in Israel. Are they actually human rights organizations, or are they a facade of human rights actually joining up with terrorist organizations to demonize and destroy the only democratic nation of Israel in the entire Middle East? Now, let's look at this. What's our problem? Just this week, I spoke with one of the a former Israeli government agent who worked with foreign media coming into Israel. He told me something absolutely astounding to me. He says, do you know where those global networks, everybody has a journalist here in Israel from their network. And he told me, he said, do you know where these international journalists from every news organization around the world, do you know where they get their information? I said, well, tell me. He said, not 95%, not even like 90-something, 99. It's 100% of them get their information from a leftist Israeli news network that Israelis do not even listen to. This Haaretz newspaper in Israel is not one that the mainstream Israel even looks at. It's designated, it's run in order to fuel the leftist news about Israel, which basically all news about Israel is stemming from a leftist, and they say, oh, it's Israeli news. No, it's not really Israeli news. It's a little organization in Israel that Israelis do not respect so much, and that is where the global news comes from. 100% of the reporters in Israel, reporting journalism in Israel, stems from this leftist, unappreciated, really, actually not so pro-Israel. It's an Israeli network that's not pro-Israel. This is where the global media is coming from, right from the government agency in Israel itself. So now let's look at this. If this is where all this news is coming from, I want to take an example of how this kind of rhetoric absolutely fuels anti-Israel, the anti-Israel demonization of this country, and how this is actually very evil at its roots. And today, as we talk about the facial recognition system. So Amnesty International, a so-called human rights organization, says that their headline this week says, Israeli authorities are using facial recognition technology to entrench apartheid. Okay, that was their headline. This took off crazy because guess what? Haaretz newspaper, that leftist little newspaper in Israel that is little in Israel but big in the international world, says this. They put out the news article, and guess who takes it on? Well, the New York Times obviously follows up with it. It says, Haaretz says, Israel's using facial recognition technology to entrench apartheid. Amnesty International says. That's their headline. Now, New York Times follows up, says, facial recognition powers automated apartheid in Israel, reports say. So now we have a global, just by the click of a Haaretz suggestion. Hey guys, this is another way to attack Israel right now. The whole world tunes in and jumps on it. So the so-called human rights organization, let's figure out who started this, and then the news networks take it on because of a Haaretz outreach, the leftist Israeli news network. In 2022, this Amnesty International, again, so-called human rights organization, says this, I quote, let's escalate BDS, boycott, divest, and sanctions of Israel, right? Let's escalate BDS pressure to impose targeted sanctions and demand UN investigate apartheid. Now, we have a humanitarian organization, supposedly, that is highly political and is actually calling to boycott, divest, and sanction the people of Israel. Now, what kind of human rights organization is calling to boycott, divest, and sanction humans? Now, that's pretty crazy, especially when Israel, a very democratic and very much so human love of humans, is one of Israel's highest traits. People in Israel are treated very well. Now, human rights organizations demonizing the people of Israel, demanding that Jews not be treated as other human beings. Very problematic. Now, is this research and these titles misleading? Of course, at their finest, they're misleading. If we want, I would just open up the research, type it in yourself. What kind of facial recognition technology exists in the world? And do police and militaries and airports and schools, do they use them? Yes. Well, here's the stats, and I'll dive into it. The research was done in 2021 on the 100 most populated countries, and this is what was found. 6 countries have no evidence of facial recognition, mostly because they're poor and they don't have money to put into that. 1 country banned facial recognition, which a lot of us would probably appreciate that, especially in our conservative channels here, and that's Belgium. So here's to Belgium. That's great. 7 out of 10 governments are using facial recognition technology on large-scale basis. All right? 70% of police force have access to some sort of this facial recognition technology. So across the globe, 70% of police forces are using this. 60% of countries have facial recognition systems in their airports, at least some of their airports. Nearly 20% of the countries have facial recognition in some of their schools. All right. Almost 80% of countries are using facial recognition technology within some of their banking and financial institutions. Around 40% of countries have implemented facial recognition technologies within their workplaces. All right. And 20% of countries have facial recognition testing or technologies on some buses, and while 30% have it on some trains and subways. Now, that's a quick overall picture of facial recognition being used on the globe. Now, I want to highlight specifically, the world is using facial recognition for security, I would say predominantly. So, this is where the big question has to be begged. Why is Israel using facial recognition for security against an enemy, apartheid? That's the question we'll get to. But first, guys, I'd say one of the biggest con jobs happening on the global stage is the Arab remake of the area of Judea and Samaria. They've been able to tell the world that it's no longer Judea and Samaria. Some of the oldest places and cities in the world are in this location, and you all know those names. They're right out of the Bible. They've been able to convince the world that no, this is not Judea and Samaria and all these cities that are part of this. It's actually called the West Bank. We've created a t-shirt. Here it is. We've created a t-shirt. It's not the West Bank. It strikes out right out of there. It's Judea and Samaria. On the back of this t-shirt, it's got all of the ancient cities that still exist in this ancient biblical homeland of the Jewish people, all on the back of it. Guys, go to our Israel Guys site now. Order one of those t-shirts. It's the best way to stand against this global campaign against the ancient, historic, biblical people and land of Israel. So go to the IsraelGuys.com, buy one of those t-shirts, or just click the link in the description below. So why is Israel being singled out? That's our question. Israel's being singled out. Again, we're talking about this. 70 to 80% of the global countries, out of these 100 most populated countries, are using the facial recognition systems specifically for security. So why are the global media networks allowed to say that Israel is using this, and because Israel's using it, it's now apartheid? Do you know that all of these systems, these facial recognition systems, are geared towards one thing, in security? It's geared towards finding and eliminating the bad people, the terrorist. And in Israel, that's very clear. In conservative circles, you're all thinking, well, maybe that's me. Maybe no. In Israel, it's not that way. Here in Israel, they're fighting a war against terrorism. The attack made by Amnesty International and by the Haaretz newspaper and by the New York Times and all those that are around the world that are picking up this story right now is against Israel's fight against terrorism. If there's anything that makes me sleep better and feel much more comfortable on Israel's roads, is that there's a powerful IDF working constantly to take out those terror beds. And one way they're doing that is through this facial recognition system. Would you not feel more comfortable coming into Israel knowing that the IDF has the pictures of every terrorist or everyone that's posted on their social media networks how they're going to kill Jews, and now Israel knows who they are? That's comforting to me to know that Israel knows who they are, and that if they get in a car and want to drive to Tel Aviv and blow something up, they will be stopped because their picture will be picked up as they drive. Now, maybe that sounds like cutting edge, and it is a little bit over our like it makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable with the amount of technologies that are there. But when it's used for security and protecting my life and your life, let's say that would be a good thing to use it for. Maybe there's other things around the world and other countries that we know of that's not being used that way, and that's problematic. So let's leave that to another discussion, how to use it. Israel's using it. And this thing that the leftists are attacking for security, what they're suggesting is that Israel dismantle their intelligence. We're calling this is intelligence. It's in the military. They're using it to track terrorism and to make sure those terrorists do not make it into public Jewish or visiting those tourist circles to cause harm. That's a very good thing. So what they're asking Israel to do is to eliminate their highest advanced technologies in tracking terrorism, and that somehow, because it's apartheid, don't ask me why it's apartheid to track your enemies and not allow your enemies to inflict casualties upon your people. This is what they classify as apartheid. So this is what... again, on this note, I will quote Amnesty International. They say, Amnesty International is calling on Israeli authorities to end the mass and targeted surveillance of Palestinians and lift the arbitrary restrictions they have imposed on Palestinians. Freedom of movement across the occupied territories as necessary step towards dismantling apartheid. So, end quote. In other words, the so-called human rights group is calling on Israel's security forces to stop monitoring Arab terror beds in and throughout Judea and Samaria. I will tell you that comes from no human rights organization. If you really cared about human rights, human life, you would stop supporting terrorism and terror beds to come and attack Jews. Instead, you would support Israel's right to exist and defend itself against terrorism. Period, exclamation point. So to Amnesty, which in my book is no human rights organization, maybe in some other parts of the world they got it right. When it comes to Israel, you got it completely wrong. If you're standing in support of dismantling Israel's security against terror, you got it wrong. Israel needs intense monitoring of these terror beds. It has to watch it day and night, not because there's some so-called this Palestinian people that's oppressed. No, it's because that Palestinian people allows terrorism to flourish and grow, and the local walking down the street supports it. The government, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, supports it from the main stage. So as long as the Palestinian people are supporting terrorism and hiding terrorism and allowing terrorism to work in their cities and towns, just now I got a report on my phone saying that there's a stabbing attack again in Hawara. Okay, Hawara is a terror bed now. What do we do with it? Well, Israel has to increase, not decrease, its hold and break down the terror beds. So to any human rights organization that says Israel needs to stop monitoring terror beds in Palestinian towns and villages, which unfortunately they have to monitor all Palestinian towns and villages, because all Palestinian towns and villages throughout Judea and Samaria have some sort of terror bed within them. That's just the way it is. They have to be monitored. We'll stop there. I think you guys get the point. Moving on, guys, I want you to, we've got to support Israel nowadays more than ever. If you really understand what I'm speaking about, we've got to engage in Israel and support Israel. We've got to bring a new rhetoric to the stage. We've got to stop this unpopular, unsupported rhetoric that's coming from the news networks in Israel that does not represent Israel. But you may think it does because it ends up on the global stage. All of this nonsense coming out is not supported by Israel. It's a shame to the people of Israel when they see these networks that are flat out hostile to the nation of Israel. We've got to replace it with positive and encouraging news from Israel. That's what we're all about here at the Israel Guys. Go ahead and subscribe. Let's get the conversation going. We've got to get more positive news. We got to get pro-Israel news. The people of Israel are pro-Israel. If you read news networks that are not pro-Israel, you're going down the wrong direction. Haaretz is definitely one of those. New York Times is following the tune of the haters of Israel. We've got to stop that. Guys, like I said, go ahead and subscribe. Let's get the conversation. Follow us on social media. And as always, go ahead and buy that t-shirt right now. We're crossing that West Bank out. We're saying it's Judea and Samaria. We're going back to the historic. We're going to the original. The Jewish people have been here. They will be here. They'll continue to be here. And we're going to support that. Guys, as always, stay tuned. Tune out the fake news and tune into what's actually happening here in Israel. We're here every Monday through Friday with your direct connection to the land and people of Israel.